"You're telling me this man belongs at a leadership gala?" The laughter came fast, sharp, and effortless, rolling across the grand ballroom like a wave that nobody bothered to stop. 30 minutes later, many of those same people would be too stunned to speak. The Crystal Heights Convention Center glowed beneath towering chandeliers, their warm light reflecting off polished marble floors and rows of perfectly arranged tables. Executives from across the country filled the room. Tech founders, investors, board members, industry leaders, people who measured success in quarterly reports and private jet schedules. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hayes, the 40-year-old CEO of Hayes Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America. Confident, brilliant, admired, feared. Her navy designer gown matched the calm authority in her voice as she welcomed guests to the company's annual leadership gala. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked, conversations buzzed beneath the soft hum of the ballroom's air conditioning. It was a night built to celebrate achievement. Then the unexpected happened. Near the rear entrance, a catering employee accidentally dropped a serving tray. The sharp crash echoed through the ballroom. Heads turned instantly. A few guests rolled their eyes. Others smirked. Standing beside the fallen tray was a tall man wearing a simple black service uniform. His name tag read Ethan Reed. He immediately crouched down and began gathering the scattered silverware. "Sorry about that," he said quietly. "Nobody's hurt." His voice was calm, steady, almost invisible. Most people looked away after a second. Victoria didn't. She watched him from across the room. Something about his composure irritated her. Perhaps it was because everyone else seemed nervous around power while he appeared completely unaffected by it. She stepped down from the stage and crossed the ballroom floor. The crowd naturally parted for her. Ethan finished collecting the last fork and stood. Victoria stopped a few feet away. "You work for the catering company?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied politely. "Interesting." A faint smile touched her lips. "You seem unusually comfortable for someone surrounded by people who run billion-dollar companies." Several nearby executives chuckled. Ethan simply nodded. "Everybody's just people." A few eyebrows lifted. Victoria's smile tightened. "That's a nice thought." More laughter followed. Although some people spend decades building companies while others carry trays. The comment landed exactly as intended. A few guests laughed louder. Someone whispered, "Ouch." Ethan remained perfectly still. No anger, no embarrassment, no attempt to defend himself. The silence around him felt strangely solid, like a mountain refusing to move for the wind. Victoria folded her arms. "Tell me, Mr. Reed, what leadership lessons have you learned from serving appetizers?" More laughter. Ethan glanced briefly around the room. Crystal glasses shimmered beneath golden light. Expensive watches reflected tiny sparks from the chandeliers. Hundreds of eyes waited for him to become the evening's entertainment. Instead, he offered a small smile. "The same lesson I've learned everywhere." Victoria tilted her head. "And what's that?" Ethan's voice remained calm. "The strongest people in the room are usually the ones who don't need everyone to know it." The laughter faded. Not completely, but enough. Somewhere near the front table, an older board member slowly lifted his eyes toward Ethan. Something about that name. Something about that face. A memory stirred. Faint. Impossible. Forgotten. And for the first time that evening, someone important began paying very close attention. The older board member did not laugh. While conversations slowly resumed around the ballroom, his attention remained fixed on Ethan Reed. He studied the man carefully, searching through layers of memory that refused to settle into place. The name felt familiar. The posture felt familiar. Even the calm confidence in his eyes stirred something long forgotten. But before he could say anything, another executive stepped beside him and pulled him into conversation. The moment passed. For now. Across the ballroom, Ethan quietly returned to work. He picked up an empty tray, adjusted a stack of plates, and continued helping the catering team as if nothing unusual had happened. The comments, the laughter, the public embarrassment, none of it seemed to touch him. Victoria Hayes noticed. She had spent most of her career surrounded by people eager to impress her or terrified of disappointing her. Ethan was neither. That unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She returned to the stage and continued hosting the evening, but every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the back of the room where he worked. The gala moved forward. Awards were presented. Executives congratulated one another. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. The scent of expensive food mixed with polished wood and fresh flowers. Yet somehow the energy felt different now. Subtle. Almost impossible to explain. Near one of the side exits, Ethan checked his phone during a quiet moment. Picture filled the screen. A smiling 12-year-old girl wearing a soccer jersey and holding a science fair ribbon. His daughter, Lily. A new text message waited beneath the photo. Dad, do not forget. Parent night tomorrow at 6. He smiled instantly. The kind of smile that appeared only when nobody was watching. Except someone was. Victoria had noticed from across the room. Strange, she thought. A man who had been publicly mocked only minutes earlier should have looked angry, embarrassed, or defeated. Instead, he looked grateful, peaceful even. She found herself walking toward him again. You have children? She asked. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. One daughter. How old? 12. Victoria nodded. That cannot be easy alone. Ethan's expression softened. Some days are harder than others. And yet you seem happy. He glanced toward the ballroom. I have a roof over our heads. My daughter is healthy. We have dinner together every night. That puts me ahead of a lot of people. Victoria folded her arms. You define success differently than most people in this room. Ethan smiled slightly. Most people in this room probably define success differently than each other. For a second, she almost laughed. Almost. But before she could respond, one of her senior vice presidents hurried over. His face looked tense. Victoria, we have a problem. Her expression changed immediately. What happened? The live presentation for tomorrow's investor summit. He lowered his voice. The demonstration platform is failing again. The smile disappeared completely from Victoria's face. Tomorrow's summit was the most important event of the year. Investors from New York, Chicago, Dallas, and Silicon Valley were arriving overnight. Millions of dollars depended on that presentation. I thought engineering fixed it, she said sharply. They thought they did. And now, the executive hesitated. Nobody knows why it keeps crashing. Victoria closed her eyes for a brief moment. Around them, the gala continued. Music played. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Yet beneath the polished surface, pressure was beginning to build. Ethan quietly picked up another tray. Sounds important, he said. It is, Victoria replied. Very important. Their eyes met for only a second. Then Ethan gave a simple nod and returned to work. But neither of them noticed that the same board member from earlier was watching once again. This time, he was staring at Ethan with growing disbelief, because a memory had finally returned. And what he remembered made his heart skip a beat. The board member set down his glass so carefully that nobody around him noticed his hand trembling. His name was Richard Calloway, one of the earliest investors in Hayes Dynamics and one of the few people in the room old enough to remember how the company had truly begun. For years, he had believed the story everyone else repeated. Brilliant executives. Strategic acquisitions. Perfect timing. Yet standing 20 feet away was a man connected to a chapter that had quietly disappeared from the public narrative. Richard excused himself from the conversation and walked toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. His mind drifted back more than a decade. Conference room. Whiteboards covered in equations. Endless discussions about infrastructure systems that nobody else could solve. And one young innovator who always seemed 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. Ethan Reed. No, could not be. Yet the more he looked, the harder it became to deny. The same calm eyes, the same measured way of speaking, the same habit of listening longer than everyone else before offering a solution. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, Victoria Hayes had joined a small circle of executives near the stage. Her vice president continued explaining the growing problem. The system failed 3 more times during testing. Victoria frowned. What about the backup environment? Unstable. The consultants? Still investigating. Frustration flashed across her face. Tomorrow morning, hundreds of investors would watch a live demonstration that represented years of work. Failure was not an option. Around them, guests continued celebrating, unaware of the pressure building beneath the surface. Victoria took a slow breath and forced a professional smile as another group approached to congratulate her. Leadership often required appearing calm even when the ground felt uncertain beneath your feet. Near the service station, Ethan finished organizing supplies for the evening staff. The younger employees seemed drawn to him without understanding why. One college student balancing a tray asked, "How do you stay so relaxed all the time?" Ethan smiled. "Practice." "Seriously. Seriously." The young man laughed. "If somebody talked to me the way some people talk around here, I would lose my mind." Ethan adjusted a stack of plates. "Most people are fighting battles you cannot see. Pride usually makes those battles louder." The young employee nodded slowly. He was not entirely sure what Ethan meant, but somehow the words stayed with him. A few minutes later, Ethan stepped outside through a side entrance to get fresh air. The cool evening breeze carried the distant sound of traffic. Across the city skyline, office towers glowed against the darkening sky. He pulled out his phone again. Another message from Lily waited on the screen. "Good luck tonight, Dad. Do not work too hard." A warm smile touched his face. He typed back immediately, "Home soon. Save me some of those cookies." Before he could put the phone away, a voice spoke behind him. "I knew it was you." Ethan turned. Richard Calloway stood beneath the outdoor lights, staring at him with disbelief. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Richard shook his head slowly. 12 years, he said quietly. 12 years, and somehow you end up here carrying catering trays. Ethan looked toward the city lights. His expression remained calm. Life takes unexpected turns. Richard laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Only amazement. "Do they have any idea who you are?" Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket. "No." Richard stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked back toward the ballroom where Victoria Hayes and her executives were desperately trying to solve a problem. "They are about to find out," he said. Richard's words lingered in the cool night air. Ethan looked at him for a moment and then gave a small shake of his head. "There is nothing to find out," he said quietly. "That chapter ended a long time ago." Richard stared at him in disbelief. "You built systems people still study today. Other people improved them. They improved what you started." Ethan smiled politely. "And now I make sure banquet guests have clean tables. Life keeps moving." Before Richard could respond, the ballroom doors opened and another executive stepped outside. "There you are," he said to Richard. "Victoria needs everyone in the conference suite. The platform issue just got worse." The executive hurried back inside. Richard looked toward Ethan. "You should come." Ethan chuckled softly. "I do not think anyone is asking the catering staff to solve corporate problems." Richard opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The truth was that Ethan would never force his way into a room. That had never been his style. Back inside, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The celebration was still happening in the ballroom, but behind closed doors a dozen senior executives sat around a polished walnut conference table. Laptops glowed beneath recessed lighting. Tension filled every seat. Victoria stood at the front of the room studying a screen covered with error reports. "Walk me through it again," she said. The lead engineer rubbed his forehead. "Every test environment eventually fails." "Why?" "We do not know. You built it. Not this part." The room fell silent. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" The engineer hesitated. "Some of the foundational architecture was created years ago. Most of the original documentation disappeared during multiple acquisitions. So nobody understands the core system?" "Not completely." Frustration spread across several faces. Millions of dollars and years of development depended on technology that nobody fully understood anymore. The irony was painful. Victoria crossed her arms. Tomorrow morning is non-negotiable. Investors arrive at 8. The presentation begins at 9. We need answers tonight. No one spoke. The silence stretched longer than anyone liked. Then Richard finally leaned forward. Maybe I know someone who can help. Several executives looked up. Victoria sighed. At this point, I will listen to any idea. Richard glanced around the room. Do any of you know who designed the original framework that everything else was built on? Blank expressions answered him. One vice president shrugged. Another shook her head. The lead engineer looked curious. Richard slowly stood. That is the problem. Nobody remembers. Victoria frowned. What are you talking about? Richard walked toward the window overlooking the ballroom below. Guests laughed beneath sparkling chandeliers. Servers moved between tables. Music drifted through the building. And among hundreds of people, one quiet man continued doing his job. Richard pointed downward. The person who understands your system better than anyone in this company is standing right there. Victoria followed his gaze. Her eyes settled on Ethan carrying a tray across the ballroom floor. For several seconds, nobody said a word. Then a young executive laughed. The catering guy? Richard did not laugh. Yes. Another executive smiled awkwardly. You cannot be serious. Richard turned slowly. I have never been more serious in my life. The smiles vanished. Victoria stared through the glass at Ethan. The same man she had mocked only an hour earlier. The same man who seemed completely unaffected by status, power, or recognition. And for the first time that evening, uncertainty began replacing confidence. Because if Richard Calloway was right, then the person everyone had overlooked might be the only person capable of saving tomorrow's summit. For several moments, nobody inside the conference suite spoke. The executives exchanged uncertain glances while Victoria Hayes continued staring through the glass at Ethan moving quietly between tables below. The image did not make sense. Not with everything Richard had just implied. Not with the reality standing in front of them. Finally, Victoria turned away from the window. You are telling me that the person carrying catering trays designed the foundation of our platform? Richard nodded. Not part of it. The foundation. The lead engineer frowned. That is impossible. If he was that important, why is nobody talking about him? Richard gave a tired smile. Because he never cared about being talked about. Silence settled over the room again. Then Victoria made a decision. Bring him here. 10 minutes later, Ethan stepped into the conference suite. His black service uniform looked strangely out of place among tailored suits and executive badges. Yet somehow he appeared more comfortable than anyone else in the room. He glanced around the table. You wanted to see me? Victoria folded her arms. Richard believes you can help us. Ethan looked toward Richard. Richard has always been generous. This is not generosity, Richard replied. It is memory. Ethan smiled faintly but said nothing. Victoria walked toward a large monitor displaying pages of technical reports. Our investor summit begins tomorrow morning. The demonstration platform keeps failing. My engineers cannot find the cause. Ethan studied the screen without moving closer. And you think I can? There was no arrogance in his voice. No false humility either. Just a simple question. Victoria hesitated. Can you? Ethan finally approached the monitor. Several executives watched carefully. Others appeared skeptical. One vice president leaned back in his chair, as if waiting for the entire situation to collapse into embarrassment. Ethan spent less than 30 seconds reading the information. 30 seconds. No keyboard. No notes. No discussion. Just observation. Then he pointed at a single section near the center of the screen. That is where your problem starts. The room became still. The lead engineer frowned. We already checked that. Ethan nodded. You checked the symptom. He pointed again. Not the cause. The engineer stepped forward. What cause? Ethan's eyes moved across the screen. 3 system updates ago, someone modified the resource allocation sequence. The change improved short-term performance, but created instability whenever traffic spikes exceed expected thresholds. Several people blinked. The engineer stared. How could you possibly know that? Ethan smiled slightly. Because the original architecture was designed to avoid exactly that problem. Victoria narrowed her eyes. You are guessing. Ethan looked at her calmly. No, I am remembering. The room fell silent. The engineer hurried toward his laptop and began typing furiously. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then another. Suddenly he stopped moving. Oh my God! Every head turned toward him. What? Victoria asked. The engineer looked up slowly. His face had gone pale. He is right. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody questioned him. The confidence that had filled the room earlier seemed to evaporate all at once. Ethan simply stepped back from the monitor as though nothing remarkable had happened. Outside the conference room windows, the gala continued beneath golden lights and crystal chandeliers. But inside, something had changed forever. For the first time that night, the people who had overlooked him were beginning to understand that they had not been looking at an ordinary catering employee at all. The lead engineer remained frozen in front of his laptop. Around the conference table, executives who had spent months studying reports were now staring at Ethan as though they were seeing him for the first time. Victoria Hayes looked from the screen to Ethan and back again. Fix it, she said. The words came out sharper than intended. Ethan did not seem offended. He simply glanced at the clock on the wall. I can show you how to fix it. How long will it take? Asked the vice president. If your team follows instructions, less than an hour. The room erupted into motion. Laptops opened. Engineers moved from confusion to urgency. Ethan walked to the front of the room and accepted a marker from one of the staff members. He turned toward a whiteboard and began sketching a series of simple diagrams. No dramatic presentation. No attempt to impress anyone. Just clear explanations delivered with calm precision. Your system is not failing because it lacks capacity, he explained. It is failing because it is fighting itself. Several engineers exchanged glances. Ethan continued. Imagine a highway designed for 200,000 cars per day. Then imagine adding more lanes without adjusting the exits. Traffic still collapses. The lead engineer nodded slowly. The allocation conflict. Exactly. Ethan drew another diagram. The original architecture was designed to distribute pressure before bottlenecks formed. The later modifications accidentally removed that protection. One engineer looked up. Why did nobody catch this? Ethan smiled. Because people tend to focus on what they added instead of what they removed. The room grew quiet again. There was wisdom in that answer beyond technology. For nearly 40 minutes, Ethan guided the team through adjustments. Every instruction proved correct. Every recommendation revealed another hidden problem. Every solution brought the system closer to stability. Victoria remained near the back wall, watching. She had built a reputation on reading people, negotiating, leading, anticipating risk. Yet she had completely misjudged the man standing in front of her. Earlier that evening, she had reduced him to a job title. Now some of the brightest engineers in the company were writing down his every word. Shortly before midnight, the lead engineer suddenly stood up. His eyes widened as new test results appeared. Run it again, he said. Another engineer executed the simulation. The numbers held steady. Again, they tested higher traffic levels. No failure. Again. More simulations followed. The platform remained stable. A slow smile spread across the lead engineer's face. It is fixed. Nobody cheered immediately. They simply stared at the screen as if afraid the result might disappear. Then relief swept across the room. Several executives exhaled deeply. One engineer actually laughed. Another leaned back in his chair and covered his face with both hands. Weeks of pressure had vanished in minutes. Ethan set down the marker. Looks like you are ready for tomorrow. Richard Calloway smiled. You just saved the summit. Ethan shook his head. The team saved it. I only pointed them in the right direction. Victoria studied him carefully. Most people would have claimed credit. Most people would have enjoyed the recognition. Ethan seemed eager to avoid both. As he turned toward the door, ready to return to work, a quiet question escaped her lips. "Why did you walk away?" Ethan stopped. The room fell silent. He did not need to ask what she meant. He already knew. And for the first time all night, something deeper than technology entered the conversation. The question lingered in the room long after Victoria spoke it. Ethan stood quietly near the door, one hand resting on the back of a chair. The celebration downstairs continued, but inside the conference suite nobody seemed interested in returning to the gala. They wanted an answer. Richard already knew part of the story. The others knew almost nothing. Ethan looked toward the city lights beyond the windows. For a moment his reflection appeared in the glass beside the skyline. Older now, more tired around the eyes, yet peaceful in a way success had never managed to provide. "My wife passed away 11 years ago," he said softly. The room became completely still. "At the time I was working 18-hour days. Sometimes more. No one interrupted. I kept telling myself I was building a future for my family. I thought success required sacrifice." He smiled faintly. "The problem was that I kept sacrificing the wrong things." Victoria lowered her eyes. Ethan continued. "One morning I realized I could explain every detail of my company to investors, but I could not remember the last time I sat through an entire dinner with my wife without checking my phone." The words landed heavily. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. They understood exactly what he meant. After she was gone, none of the awards mattered anymore. None of the headlines mattered. None of the money changed what happened. Silence followed. Ethan's voice remained steady. "Then it became just me and Lily." A small smile returned when he spoke his daughter's name. She was 1 year old. Suddenly the most important job in my life was not building technology. It was raising a little girl. Richard nodded slowly. He remembered those years. The phone calls Ethan stopped returning. The interviews he declined. The opportunities he ignored. At the time, everyone thought he had lost ambition. Now the truth felt much different. "So you walked away from everything?" Victoria asked quietly. "Not everything," Ethan replied. "Just the parts that kept me away from what mattered most." Nobody spoke for several seconds. The room felt smaller now, more honest. The lead engineer stared at the whiteboard covered with Ethan's diagrams. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Every time I pay a repair bill." A few people laughed. The tension eased. "But then Lily tells me about her day, or shows me a science project, or beats me at chess." His smile widened. "And suddenly I feel like the richest man in America." Even Victoria could not hide her smile. For the first time all evening she saw something she had completely missed before. Strength without ego. Intelligence without arrogance. Success without the need for recognition. The qualities she admired most were standing in front of her all along. A notification suddenly appeared on one of the conference room screens. The lead engineer looked up. The final stress test just completed. Everyone turned toward the monitor. Green indicators filled the display. Every system was stable. Every benchmark passed. The room erupted into relieved applause. Not forced applause. Genuine applause. Ethan looked almost embarrassed by it. Then another executive entered the room carrying a tablet. "Victoria," he said breathlessly, "you need to see this." He handed her the device. She scanned the screen. Her eyes widened. "This cannot be right." Richard stepped closer. "What is it?" Victoria looked up slowly. "The chairman of our parent corporation just landed early." The room fell silent again. The chairman rarely attended company events in person. His schedule was legendary. "He is asking for Ethan Reed," she said. "Specifically by name." The conference suite emptied within minutes. Executives hurried downstairs. Engineers returned to their stations. Word traveled quietly through the building that someone important had arrived. Very important. Ethan followed the group at a relaxed pace, as though none of it concerned him. The ballroom looked different now. The music still played. Crystal glasses still sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Yet a strange anticipation lingered in the air. Conversations softened. Heads turned toward the main entrance. Then the doors opened. Chairman Theodore Bennett stepped inside, surrounded by only 2 assistants. He was one of the most influential figures in American business, a man whose decisions moved markets and shaped entire industries. Guests immediately recognized him. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Victoria stepped forward to greet him. "Mr. Bennett, we were not expecting you until tomorrow morning." Theodore smiled politely. "Neither was I." His eyes moved past her, searching, looking. Then they stopped. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood beside a service station holding an empty tray. The chairman's expression changed instantly. Surprise gave way to warmth, respect, something even deeper. Without hesitation, Theodore crossed the ballroom floor. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Nobody understood what was happening. Victoria certainly did not. The chairman ignored executives worth millions of dollars. He ignored investors. He ignored board members. He walked directly toward Ethan Reed. The room grew quieter with every step. Richard Calloway watched with a knowing smile. He had seen this before. Theodore finally stopped in front of Ethan. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. Then the chairman extended his hand. "I have been trying to find you for years." Complete silence spread across the ballroom. Ethan shook his hand. "I have been busy." A faint laugh escaped Theodore. Apparently, Victoria stood frozen several feet away. So did everyone else. Theodore turned toward the crowd. "Do all of you know who this man is?" Nobody answered. The chairman nodded slowly. "That does not surprise me." He looked back at Ethan. "Would you forgive me for telling the story?" Ethan sighed softly. "You are going to tell it anyway." Several people laughed nervously. Theodore faced the audience. 12 years ago, when most of this industry was chasing trends, Ethan Reed solved problems nobody else could solve. Technologies still generating billions of dollars today exist because he saw solutions the rest of us missed. Silence deepened. Theodore continued. "The architecture behind some of the most successful platforms in modern business traces back to ideas he created." Victoria felt her heart sink. Every executive who had questioned Richard earlier stood motionless. Theodore gestured toward Ethan. "I offered him executive positions, ownership opportunities, more money than most people could spend in a lifetime." He paused. "He turned all of it down." Someone in the crowd finally whispered, "Why?" Theodore smiled. "Because he wanted to raise his daughter." Not a single sound followed those words. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Victoria remembered every interaction from earlier that evening. The joke, the comments, the assumptions. Ethan had never defended himself because he had never needed to. Theodore looked around the room one final time. Some people chase recognition their entire lives. Ethan walked away from it when he already had it. Then the chairman placed a hand lightly on Ethan's shoulder. "In my opinion, that is far more impressive than becoming rich." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The laughter from earlier had vanished completely. In its place stood something far rarer. Respect. For several long seconds after Theodore Bennett finished speaking, nobody in the ballroom moved. The silence felt different now. It was no longer the silence of confusion. It was the silence of understanding. Victoria Hayes stood among executives, investors, and board members, yet she had never felt more aware of herself. Earlier that evening, she had looked at Ethan Reed and seen a job title. Now she saw a man whose character had quietly outgrown every label attached to him. Theodore eventually smiled and stepped back. "I believe I have embarrassed him enough for one night." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the crowd. Ethan shook his head with a small smile. "You always did enjoy dramatic entrances." The chairman laughed. "Only when they are deserved." One by one, people began approaching Ethan. Executives thanked him for saving the summit. Engineers thanked him for sharing his knowledge. Investors introduced themselves. Through it all, Ethan remained exactly the same. Polite, humble, calm. He accepted every handshake with grace, but never seemed interested in attention itself. Eventually the crowd thinned. The music resumed. Conversations slowly returned. Victoria finally walked toward him. For the first time all evening, she looked uncertain. "Ethan." He turned. "Victoria." She took a breath. "I owe you an apology." He said nothing. She continued. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I assumed things that were not true, and I did it publicly." The honesty in her voice surprised even her. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then he smiled. "You are not the first person to make that mistake. That does not make it right." "No," he agreed gently. "It does not." Victoria glanced down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "Thank you for helping us anyway." Ethan looked around the ballroom. People need help sometimes. That is true whether they are executives, engineers, or catering staff. The words landed softly, but their meaning carried weight. Victoria nodded. "You could have walked away." "Maybe. Why did you stay?" Ethan's expression warmed. "Because my daughter is watching how I live my life." The answer seemed to stop time for a moment. Not because it was complicated. Because it was simple. Theodore had been right. Some people measured success by how much they accumulated. Ethan measured it by who he became. A few minutes later, Ethan checked his phone and smiled. Another text from Lily. "Did everything go okay tonight, Dad?" He typed back immediately. "Everything went great. Be home soon. Save me one cookie." A reply arrived seconds later. "2 cookies. You earned them." Ethan laughed quietly. He slipped the phone into his pocket and said his goodbyes. As he walked toward the exit, nobody stopped him. Nobody tried to impress him. Nobody looked. Somewhere beyond those buildings was a small house, a 12-year-old girl, and a life he would never trade for boardrooms or headlines. Behind him stood wealth, influence, and recognition. Ahead of him stood home. Ethan chose home without hesitation. And as the ballroom slowly returned to its celebrations, the lesson he left behind remained. Real dignity does not need applause. Real strength does not announce itself. And sometimes the most remarkable person in the room is the one who never asks to be noticed at all.